come tap on that bell in the center of the room.
If you had the chance, would you spend the night in a haunted house? Well, a home in southwestern Minnesota is being called an Airbnb with a twist.
This house on Scandia Avenue has stood in the middle of town for more than a century. Now it may be a portal to the supernatural.
We're dealing with something not human. Right when I said that.
It's one of the most active places I know of.
Oh, look at that! Look at that! Oh, man. Holy shit, dude! What the fuck?
If Fred's here, can you touch one of the lights?
Oh! Can you ring that bell if you aren't human?
What the?
Different voices that said, I'm Fred, Fred's coming.
My name is Fred.
Oh, there was just a thump again, guys. Did you hear it?
Oh my god! But she's mean.
Oh shit, that scared. Oh!
Obviously, weird things that people see in the Appalachian Mountains. People say skinwalkers, wendigos. I don't know if you know what a wendigo is.
Yeah, I do.
Do you know how it looks like?
I don't know how it looks like, but I know that they have so much hunger that it can't be satisfied.
Specifically for human flesh that it can't be satisfied. The concept of a wendigo comes from different indigenous groups in North America. The stories that were told from them are completely different from what we've seen nowadays. Although the depiction of the wendigo is accurate in the sense of there were once humans who had turned into cannibals, and it's more also transformation of the soul. Basically lose your humanity. Their skin would become gray. They would have no lips. They would have cuts on their bodies. They had gaunt, emaciated faces, and the smell of rotting flesh would linger because of their skin. Their skin would be deteriorating to the point where you could see their bones. It didn't matter who they would eat. They would eat a family member, a friend, as long as it satisfied their needs. And then why they decided to eat humans? If you were a hunter and you had no animal to eat, or if it was wintertime, there was barely any animals to catch, they will resort to eating human flesh. And then from then on, you would get banished from your tribe. This is what people think a wendigo looks like, that you probably have seen before.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
That's how a wendigo is supposed to look like.
What the fuck?
Yeah. I know the game Until Dawn, they did like a really good, accurate depiction of what a wendigo is.
This man's body was found inside a dinosaur statue. In 2021, a massive dinosaur statue was standing silently in the middle of a park. But what lay inside would turn this innocent display into the center of a chilling tragedy. A family reported a man in his 30s missing. He hadn't returned home and his phone had gone silent. Days passed and nothing was found during the search, until a strange odor began to waft through the park. A father and son were the first to notice it, a foul stench seeping from the dinosaur's hollow belly. Concerned, they alerted the authorities. What they found was far beyond anyone's imagination. Rescue workers were forced to cut through the statue's papier-mâché exterior. As they peeled back the layers, they revealed a horrifying sight: the missing man's lifeless body, folded and contorted, trapped deep within the dinosaur. It's believed the man dropped his phone while exploring the statue, and in a desperate attempt to retrieve it, he crawled in through an opening. But once inside, the narrow space turned into a death trap. He couldn't move. He couldn't call for help. Hours turned into days as he fought against suffocation, heat, and dehydration. When the body was retrieved, it told a haunting story. His fingers were raw, his clothes soaked with sweat and dirt. He had scratched on the walls in vain, his screams swallowed by the hollow cavity of the dinosaur. Death came slowly for this man, an agonizing combination of exhaustion and despair.
The host of America's Most Wanted had a reason for going into that role. His little boy was abducted, and the child's fate is like my worst nightmare. This case literally makes me want to grab my little nephews and my little niece and just never let them go. Adam John Walsh was just 6 years old. He was the sweetest little boy who lived in Florida. It was the 27th of July 1981, and Adam's mum took him to the shops with her as she needed to buy a lamp. They entered what was then called the Hollywood Mall and made their way into Sears, which is kind of like, for my UK viewers, it's like a department store, almost like John Lewis vibes. Now, Adam's mum found the lamp that she wanted and she went to ask one of the shop assistants about it. Now, she left Adam by a little stand of video games, which he was keen to play just while his mum was speaking to somebody for a second. There were a few other little boys there and they were kind of glued to these video games and they were all taking it in turns. When his mum returned though, Adam had vanished. Concerned, she asked the manager where those boys had gone that were just playing there a few seconds ago. Frustratingly, the manager actually told the mother that the boys had got into a bit of an argument and the security man had actually told them to leave the store. Now, this bit absolutely breaks my heart just imagining what was going through his mind, but the security man kicked them out, and then the kind of older boys that had been playing on the games just dispersed. They were a little bit older, like I said, and they just went home, and Adam was just stood there on his own. Meanwhile, his mum was desperately scouring all areas of the store to try and find her little boy. She was running up and down the aisles of this shop, which was actually pretty big, and it was taking her like over an hour to look everywhere, but she just couldn't find any sign of him. After having no luck, she ended up calling the police just before 2 p.m. that day. Now, even after police arrived, they just could see absolutely no sign of the child. Days and days went on, and hopes of finding this little boy alive began to dwindle. Now, the FBI didn't even get involved until about a week after the disappearance of Adam, which many people would later criticize. Then on the 10th of August was some news that, honestly, when I was researching this case, just made me feel like I got punched in the stomach. It is literally so heart-wrenching. A severed head was discovered in a drainage canal alongside the Florida Turnpike. Now, this was initially not actually instantly identified as Adam. There's obviously a whole process that goes on to identify somebody, so Adam's parents were still really hopeful that this wasn't Adam and they would find him alive. Tragically, though, this hope was crushed when he was officially identified. His autopsy showed that his cause of death was asphyxiation. Now, police seem to have absolutely no leads and no suspects at all. Many criticised their handling of the case. It was reported that their collection of DNA was botched, and also that they had lost valuable pieces of physical evidence. Adam's dad, John, put all of his energy into advocating not only for his son, but other missing and exploited children. The Walsh family set up a non-profit organisation called the Adam Walsh Child Resource Centre. Now, it wasn't until years and years later that a serial killer came forward named Otis Toole. He apparently confessed to Adam's killing. He claimed to have lured him into his car and then knocked him unconscious before killing him with a seat belt. Although blood was found in Otis's car, police lost the evidence. He seemed to be able to give quite a lot of accurate information, to be fair, relating to the case, but it was then revealed that police seemed to have been kind of feeding him a lot of information and asking him a lot of leading questions. Many wondered if the police just literally wanted to close the case so they could move on. Now, Otis later confessed to multiple cases that he was proven to have had no involvement in, so can we really trust him? He died in prison in 1996, and although officially police say he was the killer, many contest this. Adam's dad ended up securing a deal with Fox, and he became the host of America's Most Wanted in 1988.
Nothing scares me more than when someone goes missing and obviously foul play was involved, but over time, disturbing proof is found that they could still be out there somewhere alive. In this case, a little girl gets abducted from her home in the middle of the night. After multiple sightings of her with unknown people, 911 would receive a frantic phone call a year later claiming to be this little girl. She would scream for help, and a man would be heard yelling at her in the background before the line goes dead. This is what happened to 9-year-old Antoinette Cayadito, and that last phone call from her will forever haunt me. In the early morning hours of April 6, 1986, Antoinette would be woken up by a knock on her front door. She lived with her mom Penny and her two sisters Wendy and Sadie in Gallup, New Mexico. Antoinette was described as wise beyond her years. She loved school and Bible studies, and being the oldest, she loved taking care of her two little sisters. So when the knock woke her up that fateful morning, she opened the door, and after doing so, she mysteriously disappeared. That night, Penny was out having fun at a local bar, and all three girls were at home with a babysitter. She got home around midnight, sent the babysitter home, and then went to bed. According to Penny, when she woke up at 7 the next morning to get the girls ready for Bible school, Antoinette was nowhere to be found. After searching everywhere she could think of and talking to all of the neighbors, Penny reported her missing to the Gallup Police Department. I know this was a different time, but it took police 4 days just to officially search Antoinette's home, which is crazy considering the fact that a little girl's life was on the line. Authorities began searching the entire neighborhood, but no trace of Antoinette was found, and it was literally like she vanished into thin air. While police were at the home, a family member brought up a man named Emiliano who went went by Emo. It was only then that Penny told police that in the days leading up to Antoinette's disappearance, Emo gave her flowers on 3 separate occasions. From what I can find, Emo wasn't a complete stranger to the family though. Penny's best friend was named Ronald, and I guess Ronald introduced Emo to the family. Not long after this introduction, the two would frequent Antoinette's house and often give her flowers. It's important to note that according to the family, Emo was never at the house without Ronald, but on the night of Antoinette's disappearance, he came alone. He once again brought Antoinette some flowers, and this time he also brought her a bear necklace. This was seen by multiple people who gave the same statements to police after Antoinette disappeared. So this obviously seemed like a good lead, so the police then interviewed Emo, who denied having anything to do with her disappearance. He reportedly took a polygraph test, and although the results are unknown, I'm assuming he must have passed because he was never named a suspect or person of interest. Police then began interviewing neighbors and really anyone in the area that might have any information, and this is when they met a man named Ron Perry. Ron came forward and told police that at around 3:30 the morning Antoinette disappeared, he went to the home and knocked on the front door and window trying to get Penny's attention. I guess the two had gotten into a fight at the bar and he wanted to see if she was okay. I don't know for sure if Penny ever spoke with him or not, but shortly after this he left and stayed the night at a friend's house down the road, and authorities were able to confirm his story by interviewing his friend. Without any leads to go on, Antoinette's case started to go cold, but then a series of possible sightings started to happen that would reignite the case. On April 8th, 1986, just 2 days after Antoinette disappeared, a man reported seeing her on the side of the road in San Antonio. She was wearing a long pink dress and was with a blonde-haired woman. It's never been officially confirmed if that was truly her, but the man was adamant that it was. On April 19th, a woman spotted a suspicious brown truck at a Thriftway gas station. As the truck passed, the woman could hear a little girl screaming, "Help me." And although she didn't actually see the girl, she believes that it could have been Antoinette. Then 2 months later, on June 30th, a man reported seeing Antoinette at a bus depot in El Paso, Texas. He said that she was wearing a long pink dress, which is exactly what the first witness said, but this time she had white shoes on. He also said that the girl had a noticeable mark on her cheek, and Antoinette did have a scar in that exact same place. I think out of all the sightings of her, the 911 call that the Gallup PD would receive a year after Antoinette's disappearance is the most chilling of all. It came out of the blue, and it was of a little girl claiming to be Antoinette. She said she was in Albuquerque, and she's then interrupted by a man screaming, quote, "Who said you could use the phone?" End quote. You can then hear a struggle ensue and the little girl screaming before the line went dead. I'm gonna play the recording now, and it is truly disturbing, so I'd skip this part if you don't want to hear it.
Police department. Hello. I'm Antoinette Garabito. Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque? Who said you could use the phone? Hello? Antoinette, where are you? Antoinette? Hello?
So keep in mind, this was an entire year after Antoinette's disappearance, and outside of the few possible sightings of her, there had been no leads in her case up until this point. The 911 call was shown to Penny, who confirmed that it was Antoinette speaking, but she didn't recognize the man's voice. Based on this phone call, it really seemed like Antoinette was still alive, but police couldn't trace the call, and her case would soon go cold once again. Then, 4 years later, a waitress at a restaurant in Carson City, Nevada, reported having a weird interaction with a strange family at one of her tables. According to her, she said she saw a teenage girl matching Antoinette's description to a T, but she was with an unkempt couple. The young girl kept knocking her utensils on the ground, and it seemed as though she was trying to get the waitress's attention. When the waitress would pick up the utensils and give them back to the girl would squeeze her hand really tightly. After the family left, as the waitress was cleaning up their table, she found a napkin with a note on it under the girl's plate. The note read, quote, "Help me, call the police." End quote. By the time authorities were notified, the family was gone and they've never been found or identified. On the 5-year mark of Antoinette's disappearance, police began looking into her case to see if they missed any crucial pieces of information. They decided to re-interview the family, and this is when Antoinette's younger sister, Wendy, who was 5 at the time of her disappearance, dropped a major bombshell on the investigation. Wendy tells police that on the night Antoinette went missing, she actually witnessed her being abducted. She said that someone knocked on the door, and when Antoinette answered and asked who was there, a man responded, "Uncle Joe." She was then grabbed by 2 men, and as she was kicking and screaming to let her go, the men forced her into a brown van and drove away. When asked why she never said anything about this before, Wendy said that she kept this hidden because she didn't see the men's faces and didn't know who they were, and she was also scared that she would upset her mom. She said that she didn't think anyone would believe her because she was only 5 at the time. It was around this time that Penny was re-interviewed by the FBI, and this time, her story changed as well. This time, Penny said that this knock on the door happened around 3:30 that morning, and I'm not sure if this is because she was tired or had been out drinking, but she told Antoinette to go and open the door. Penny then laid there for about 30 minutes waiting for Antoinette to come back, but she never did. And when she got up to look for her and realized she was gone, that's when she knew that she was missing. But this story differs entirely from what she told police back when it happened. The day Antoinette disappeared, she told police she woke up at 7 a.m. to find her missing, and she never once mentioned anything about making her get up to go answer the door in the middle of the night. So she either lied back then or when she was interviewed 5 years later. Another thing is that she told police that this happened around 3:30 that morning, but if you remember, Ron Perry went to the house and had actually knocked on her door around that time, yet he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So the timing of this doesn't make sense to me. It's also strange that not a single neighbor or even Penny herself heard Antoinette screaming as she was being abducted that night. I know that some people are heavy sleepers, but it's just weird to me that not one single person heard this happening. According to the FBI report from Penny's interview in 1994, she almost basically confessed to being responsible and planning Antoinette's disappearance. This was from the report, but she goes on to ask the FBI what would happen if she and Emo had something to do with it. She said how Antoinette was starting to be a troublemaker and that she wanted a better life for her, and Emo said that he would be the one to take her. This would kind of make sense to me considering he was grooming Antoinette with all the flowers and necklaces he gave to her. I don't care who you are to the family, a grown man acting that way with a little girl is a major red flag, especially when it's isolated to just one child and not all of the kids. Despite this confession, nothing ever came of it, and Penny was never charged or named an official person of interest in her daughter's disappearance. Authorities do believe that she knew more than she was letting on though, and could have possibly been involved. But Penny died in 1999, and whatever secrets she may have known went with her. Antoinette's dad, who wasn't really in the picture, also died as well in 2012. To this day, it's not known what happened to Antoinette. Some believe that this is a clear case of homicide, while others believe that this was either a random or targeted abduction. Some believe that this could be a human trafficking case, and with all of the sightings of her, as well as that eerie 911 call, this could sadly be a true possibility. I'm not sure if this is related, but I also wanted to add that 3 years after Antoinette disappeared, her 25-year-old aunt also went missing, but she was found alive a month later. I wanted to mention this because there are people who believe that the two cases could be connected. Her family has continued to look for her even today because there is a real possibility that she is out there alive somewhere. But to them, and without answers, she is forever frozen in time as a 9-year-old little girl. It's now been 38 years, and whatever happened to Antoinette that night remains a mystery.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is how police finally tracked down a murderer who killed a girl on her way to school over 30 years ago. Gloria Pointer was a schoolgirl from Cleveland, Ohio. It was December 1984 and Gloria was just 14 at the time. Heartbreakingly, she was actually due to receive a perfect attendance award at school when she failed to reach her destination on the 6th of December. No one could have guessed the horrors that would unfold. She was discovered beaten and AR'd around 2.5 hours after she began her journey to school. Tragically, due to the lack of technology at the time, her case quickly went cold. There was a serious lack of leads and any witnesses in the case, and no one was brought to justice for an agonising 3 decades. Finally, as time went on and technology advanced, there was a breakthrough. They were able to take a DNA sample from the clothing that Gloria was wearing at the time and identify the killer as Hernandez Warren. He was actually a convicted ex-offender. He was finally arrested for the murder in 2013 and he was found guilty of R and murder. He was given life in prison and will be eligible for parole in 2043.
This depraved pedophile just couldn't stop committing crimes. This is 66-year-old Karamat Mansourabadi. So Karamat is from Wisconsin, and in 2023, February 2023 to be exact, reports came in that he had assaulted a child. Obviously, the police wanted to follow this up. They went to his home, they conducted an interview, and they felt like that was enough evidence to arrest Karamat. So he was arrested for the essay of a child, but he was then let out of jail. But something that investigators didn't know is that they had found even more evidence when they searched his property. You see, in February of 2023, when investigating the SA claim, they took Karamat's cell phone into evidence. But it was a few months later when they actually started going through the cell phone when they found some disturbing evidence. On Karamat's cell phone, they found over 30 CP or CSAM images that he had downloaded from the dark web. So he was then rearrested, brought back into custody, and his bail was then set at $1.8 million, ensuring that he wouldn't be able to leave jail until his trial. So the sentencing, the trial hasn't happened here yet, but I really hope that this guy gets put away for a very extended period of time.
Chilling decades-old murder remains unsolved to this day. Police in Melbourne are now offering a $1 million reward for help. It was the 17th of February 1987. Mary Ann Fagan was 41 years old. She was living in Armadale in Australia and was a mother of 5. On the day in question, Mary was last seen at 10:30 a.m. by a neighbour. She had driven her children to school shortly before. She'd also rang her husband at around 11 a.m. When school was finished for the day, her 4 eldest children made their way home and discovered their 17-month-old sibling home alone. The baby was crying and Mary's car was parked on the drive. The side gate to the house was open, but the doors were locked. Something was clearly wrong and the children decided to break into the house to see what was going on. They had the most horrific shock when they discovered their mother deceased. Shockingly, she was bound, gagged, and fatally stabbed. Some personal items were taken from inside of the property that have still never been recovered to this day. Police were actually unable to determine from the crime scene and from the victim what the likely motive might have been. Chillingly, the case remains unsolved.
This man dipped his own head into a deep fryer, and this is a massive trigger warning. Okay, so at first glance, this looks like a normal chef just cooking in a kitchen. But what happens shortly after this is absolutely nightmare-inducing. This chef tosses his own head into the deep fryer, completely deep frying his entire head with oil, and dying. And the most messed up part about this is that there is a video of this. Apparently the man was possessed by some sort of ghost or demon, but I don't know how true that is. But the most believable reasoning for this is that he had some sort of mental illness, which was even noticed by some of his co-workers. But in the video, the man rotates his head extremely weirdly and inhumane, and then just throws his head into the deep fryer with no hesitation at all, leading people to believe that he was possessed, because why else would any sane person just throw their head into a deep fryer with oil? I don't recommend anybody watching or searching for the video because it is honestly pretty disturbing. Mainly because it just comes out of nowhere and you're not expecting it at all. 1 minute the chef is just cooking food, doing his job, and the next he starts twisting his head all weirdly and throws his head into the deep frying oil. I will never watch this video again, and you should never.
Imagine your dad crashing a car with you inside and then running away, leaving you to die. Shelby Binney was a beautiful 16-year-old girl from Bixby. She was a well-loved high school student and cheerleader, and on the 11th of January was inside a car with her dad behind the wheel. On the night in question, it's believed that her mum and dad were in the front of the car having a heated argument. Her dad is also believed to have been drinking that night. It's reported that her dad was driving at around 70 miles an hour and tried to overtake another car. This caused their SUV to flip over. Shockingly, Shelby was ejected from the car on impact. A passerby tried to run over to help and shockingly reportedly witnessed Shelby's dad run away from the scene. He's believed to have fled on foot, leaving his daughter there to die. A vodka bottle was later found in the crashed car. Now, obviously not having learnt his lesson from the original crash, it's believed that Elliot, Shelby's dad, actually ran to a family-owned business in the local area and got into another car. Police were able to track the car and hunt him down after 12 hours, and he was behind the wheel. Elliot allegedly admitted to taking a gulp of the vodka that was found in the crashed vehicle. Concerningly, Elliot actually has a record of leaving accident scenes 3 previous times, but never served prison time for it.
This has to be one of the most tragic incidents involving a child you will ever hear. On May 22nd, 2015, 25-year-old mother Romisha Sims took her 3-year-old son Jaher Dano Lee to the park for some quality time. Once they got there, Romisha placed her son on one of the swings and began pushing him. All was good until Romisha started hearing voices around her and found herself in some sort of trance and was unable to lift Jair out of the swing. And when she snapped out of it, she found herself pushing her dead 3-year-old son Jair on the swing with police officers surrounding her. It turns out Romisha was a schizophrenic and she forgot to take her medication. And she pushed her son Jair nearly 44 hours on the swing without stopping. Temperatures fell as low as 51 degrees and it was raining when she was pushing him, which caused Jair to die from dehydration and hypothermia. During her trial, the judge found Romisha not criminally responsible and sent her free under a 5-year conditional release order, saying that she must see a psychiatrist and take her medication. This case is so sad, and can you imagine being this mother snapping out of that trance? She was probably so scared and confused and was wondering what happened to her little boy. Rest in peace to Jair, and this is just so unfortunate.
This man was murdered by the most unlikely suspect. It was May 2017 in Bel Air, Ohio. Brad McGarry lay dead in his basement. Brad was a 43-year-old local gay man who worked in a coal mine. His friend 30-year-old David McKinney had raised the alarm when he had reportedly found Brad deceased. He was with his wife and daughter at the time. Now, Brad's death was obviously a huge shock to the local community. Who on earth would have had a motive to kill him? Clues actually lay at the crime scene. Brad's home appeared to be completely disheveled, as you would expect in a home invasion. However, unlike a normal burglary, nothing of great value was actually taken. Some expensive items lay completely undisturbed in the home. The crime scene appeared to be staged. Police started interviewing people who knew Brad and family and friends. They uncovered something very telling. Brad's cousin told authorities that Brad had actually been having an affair with a married man. The day he was killed, he was planning to meet a man named DJ. They'd been reportedly having an affair for years. It was then revealed that DJ's real name was David McKinney. When David was interrogated, he repeatedly changed his story. He finally confessed to the killing, but he stated it was self-defense. He was ultimately found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Imagine being so afraid of your ex that you go to police for help multiple times. After they refuse to help you, he burns you alive. Just days before she was murdered, Kelly Wilkinson repeatedly cried out for help. She was a 27-year-old mother living in Brisbane. She was separated from her husband, former US Marine Brian Johnston. In early April 2021, he was actually charged with 4 serious counts of DV and was given watch house bail. In the next couple of weeks, Kelly was in serious distress. She actually tried to speak to police on numerous occasions, actually reportedly nearly every day, about her concerns. She told them she was scared for her life and scared for her children's life. She repeatedly told officers she just wasn't safe. Infuriatingly, they dismissed her claims as cop shopping. Kelly even reported to police that her ex had breached the conditions of his bail. She was turned away and told that there was nobody there who could deal with a DV issue. On the 20th of April, things would take a tragic turn. Having been completely let down by the people and systems that are supposed to protect her, Kelly was actually tied to a washing line by Brian and set on fire. Her burned body was discovered in her back garden at her home in Queensland. Brian was also found near the scene with burn injuries on him. Police recovered a petrol can, knives, rope and duct tape from the crime scene. He has pleaded guilty to her murder and will be sentenced in March.
This woman is what nightmares are made of. She is nicknamed by history as the Black Widow, the Queen of Cocaine, the Godmother. I'm talking about Griselda Blanco. Raised in Colombia by a horrifically abusive mother, Griselda Blanco started a life of crime and prostitution at a very early age. After the death of her first husband, Griselda married a man named Alberto Bravo, and in the 70s they moved to the bustling city of New York, where they began a very successful narcotics trade, and she was designing lingerie to smuggle cocaine. These two were like the Bonnie and Clyde of cocaine. Griselda Blanco was not a woman you wanted to cross. She was a woman in the drug business, and she was notorious for her drive-by shootings on motorcycle. Matter of fact, it is said that she invented this method of killing. She was the woman behind the Dade County shopping mall massacre in 1979, where 4 people were slaughtered. She and her husband Alberto got into a dispute over drug money, and she shot him and his 6 bodyguards. Horrifically, Griselda was not opposed to killing children or women either. Matter of fact, Griselda being a bisexual, she was often known to have parties of a certain kind with multiple women, and after she got what she wanted out of those women, she would execute them for fun. She ultimately had to flee to California to avoid being assassinated. And in 2004, Griselda was actually deported back to Colombia, where somebody ultimately got their revenge, and she was killed in a motorcycle drive-by shooting. Y'all, I'm a recording artist trying to get a record deal. I tell these stories for fun. Please hit follow and like, and if you're one of my true fans, leave a comment and go check out my brand new EP called Revolver on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon. Bye.
The mother of the Uvalde school shooter was arrested last year after making death threats herself. And this seems to be an alarming pattern of behavior in this family. So if you don't remember, in 2022, this man went into the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and opened fire, killing 21 people altogether, 19 young children and 2 teachers. This was one of the most horrific events to ever really happen here in the United States. It sent shockwaves around the world, and those 21 students and teachers that lost their lives that day will never be forgotten. But in January of 2023, Salvador Ramos, the shooter's mother, Adriana Reyes, spent 2 nights in jail for threatening to murder her disabled partner that she lived with. Apparently, the man that she was dating stated that he felt terrified and felt like she could kill him at any second, and that's why he called the police to report her. Now, initially she tried to claim that this never happened, but somebody who was a witness to these threats, who actually heard her screaming these death threats, corroborated the story with the police, and she was arrested. And if you'll remember, Salvador Ramos's cousin actually threatened to do the same thing as his cousin, aka he threatened to commit another shooting last year as well. And needless to say, I think that there's just something wrong here. This week on our podcast, my wife Courtney and I are starting our series about the Uvalde school shooting. Our podcast is called Murder in America, and we're going through everything that led up to this, the police failures, the massacre itself, and obviously everything that happened afterwards.
This is by far the craziest video of 2024. This is a video that has gone viral in the past couple days in which a father or mother's boyfriend is threatening the son to shoot him, and he does. The video opens up with the father or boyfriend pointing the gun at the son. He can be heard saying, "I'm going to blow his effing brains out right now." The mother then comes over and pulls the father away, screaming, "No, no, stop." The father then walks away, and the son then says, "Blow my brains out." The father then comes back into the room screaming, "You want me to?" while pointing the gun at him. The son flinches at this point and turns away and says, "Shoot me, I dare you. I guarantee you go to jail for life." The mother then shuts the door, and you hear the father saying, "I'm getting ready to blow his brains out and yours. I'm sick of this," to the mother. The son then gets up and opens the door. He then says, "You're going to blow my mom's brains out?" The father then points the gun back at the son and fires. Everything goes silent as you hear the mom gasp. The camera then faces the floor, and you hear the mom repeating, "Did he hit you? Did he hit you?" And at this point, you see blood droplets hitting the floor. Once this happened, the mom screams, "Oh my God, you're going to jail." The son then runs out of the house and shuts the door. The video then ends. Luckily, the bullet only grazed the son's ear and he survived, and the father or mother's boyfriend then went into the backyard and ended his own life. Probably because he thought he killed the son with that shot. I don't know what caused this whole situation, but it had to be brewing for some time for the man to snap like this. You can find the video on Twitter, and it has over 25 million views in just a couple of days.
A creepy guy. This story will terrify you. This is coming in from Reddit user Kanuki. He says that he was about 14 at the time and walking back from school. Unfortunately for him, though, he would have to walk through sketchy areas oftentimes to get home. He says that he was approaching an underpass or a subway when he saw this tall man. He could only describe him as very abnormally tall, white, and very skinny. He says that he was coming out of the underpass on the side of the path that was nearby. He then immediately crosses the road to the other side. He says that he lost focus of this guy and started looking at the floor and continued to walk towards the underpass, when all of a sudden, Kanuki got a terrible feeling. He said that he looked up and he saw this man sprinting full force directly towards him. The thing that freaked him out the most, though, was his face. He said that he looked so angry and just ready to attack. He says that he's never felt this feeling prior or after this incident, but he got a cold sweat instantly, as if his body knew this man was going to try to kill him. He says that he started sprinting to escape right away. He says that he was running probably for 5 minutes when he decided to stop and look back, and the man was gone. He says he's not sure why he did this, but he decided to call a friend of his and told him the whole story. He said that he described the man to his friend, and his friend knew exactly who he was. Apparently, he was a local crazy guy who's terrorized locals for years, in and out of prison for various things. Kanuki says that he's had nightmares of people sprinting towards him ever since. So what do you guys think you would have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments down below.
This is by far one of the most sickening murders in American history. This is the Watts family, and in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shannon by strangulation, and right after this he murdered his 2 young daughters who are 4 and 3 by smothering them with a pillow, all while they begged their dad not to kill them. He then buried Shannon in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility, and he then dumped his 2 children's dead bodies into an oil tank. Christopher Watts initially maintained his innocence in his family's disappearance, but was arrested on August 15th after confessing in an interview with detectives to murdering Shannon, and he then later admitted to murdering his children. He did this because he wanted to run away and start a new life with the girl he was cheating on his wife with. And he thought the solution to this was to kill his entire family. There's also this clip of him being interviewed by some news outlet, and in the video he's begging for his wife and children to come back. Now at this point, nobody has any clue that he killed them, but he does. He remembers exactly what happened, he knows that they're dead, he knows how he killed them, and he's still on live TV begging them to come home, saying he can't live without them. Just watch this clip, it's absolutely sickening.
My last question, if you have any of them, so feel free to say it. My last question, if your wife can see this, if she can watch these, what would you like to tell your wife and your kids?
Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
That's it. I can take that mic off.
This case has had my brain working overtime ever since it happened. It's still unsolved, and I would love to know your theories. Carly Goosey was reported missing by her family on the morning of October 13th, 2018. The night before, she had been out partying with friends, and when she returned home, she was acting really bizarrely. She was slurring her words, she was disorientated, and she was acting that strangely that her parents actually recorded her in the hopes that they could show that to her the next morning to put her off doing drugs again. She admitted to smoking marijuana, but her dad, Zach, believed that it had been laced with something stronger. Only when they woke up, Carly was nowhere to be seen. She had completely vanished. They did stay up with her most of the night to make sure she was okay, but eventually they dozed off, and when they woke up, she was gone. Witnesses did report seeing someone matching Carly's description in the early hours of the morning, walking south away from her Mono County home. At the time of her disappearance, Carly was just 16 years old, and 4 years later, in 2022, this age progression picture was released, showing what she might look like, in the hopes that someone might come forwards, and somebody actually did. In August 2023, investigators were investigating a lead from a recovering drug user, saying that he'd seen Carly in 2021 at a party, 2.5 years after she went missing. Unfortunately, nothing came of this lead. It's now over 5 years later, and Carly's family still have absolutely no idea what happened to her. How can someone just leave the house in the middle of the night and vanish into thin air? They are not giving up hope though, and they do hope that someone one day will come forward with some information.
The former NYPD detective started working with a forensic biologist that decided to test if Todd was actually in the lake for 3 weeks like police say. Together they placed pig carcasses, which is reportedly very similar to human bodies in terms of decomposition, into a pond for 3 weeks, dressed in clothing that resembled Todd's outfit. The carcasses collected aquatic insects within the first day, and by day 3, the insects had laid eggs. By day 21, the carcasses completely collapsed from the insect activity, and the clothes were covered in that slimy green film from the water. This test proved that it's extremely unlikely that Todd's body was in the lake for those 22 days. So they gave all of this information to the Michigan State Police in hopes they would reopen and reinvestigate the case, but nothing has really come of it. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believe Todd is a possible victim of the smiley face killers. The smiley face killer is a theory, emphasis on theory, of an alleged network of serial killers that targets college-age men and dumps their bodies in nearby waterways. They then leave graffiti smiley faces at the death sites. This is controversial, but I figured I'd add this in because multiple people came forward and stated that they saw a smiley face spray painted onto a tree near where Todd's body was found. A card with a smiley face on it was also found on his grave. Todd's mom even believes that he could be a possible victim of the smiley face killers. But the Michigan State Police almost refused to look deeper into this case. They created a petition to reopen Todd's case with the permission of his mom, and it would mean the world to her if he would sign it and join the fight in getting Todd justice. The link is in my bio. South Yorkshire Police are officially investigating the death of U.S. ice hockey player Adam Johnson, who horrifically died during a game on Saturday. Adam was an extremely talented hockey player who recently began playing for the Nottingham Panthers for the 2023-2024 season. On Saturday, the Panthers were playing against the Sheffield Steelers at the Utilita Arena in England. During the second period, Adam suffered a serious neck injury after colliding with Matt Petgrave, a Steelers player. Everyone in the arena witnessed the incident, and it was also caught on video, which I do not recommend watching out of respect for Adam's family. It's incredibly graphic, and I wish that I didn't see it. Adam briefly stood up, bleeding profusely out of his neck. He did manage to skate off the ice with the help of a teammate, but he ultimately collapsed again. His teammates tried to help him, but he was rushed to the hospital where doctors tried to get him through surgery, but they couldn't stop the bleeding, and he ultimately died. The arena was immediately evacuated, and the game was suspended after Adam was rushed to the hospital. The police have recently stated that although its officers have now left the scene, the investigation remains ongoing, and it will take time due to the complex nature of this tragic incident. They said that with any unexpected or sudden deaths, it's standard practice to fully investigate the circumstances and report their findings to the coroner. The English Ice Hockey Association has since stated that starting December 31st, neck guards will become mandatory for player safety. In the meantime, they are strongly recommended, but they do understand that there will likely be some anticipated supply issues. There's been a major uproar on social media where many believe that Matt's kick was intentional, while many others, including a few of Adam's teammates, think that this was a horrific freak accident and they don't blame Matt for the incident. According to an international sports lawyer, from a theoretical standpoint, Matt could be prosecuted. But from a practical standpoint, it's not super likely, as officials would have to find sufficient evidence that the kick was intentional and that this was more than just a freak accident. But overall, Adam's family just wants this to be investigated properly. I mean, after all, we have seen this happen time and time again. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio that's organized by the Nottingham Panthers Ice Hockey Club. All of the donations will go to supporting local charitable activities in Hibbing, Minnesota, which was Adam's hometown. Rest in peace, Adam Johnson.
This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words Katie's Revenge across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin.
Some people are saying that this video is proof that a demon possessed this priest. Let me know in the comments what you think. Watch this. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think this priest was really possessed by a demon? Or is he just a piece of shit?
This man is one of the worst pedophiles in the history of Texas. I'm going to warn you right now, this story is extremely graphic and disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. So the Galleria Mall in Houston is one of the largest malls in America. It's actually only about 15 minutes from where my apartment is, and it's a very, very nice mall. But at a kiosk inside of the mall worked one of the worst monsters I've ever read about. This man, Arthur Fernandez. So on December 6, 2023, an Australian anti-child exploitation agency flagged a video that appeared from America. This video appeared to depict two toddlers being essayed by a group of at least 7 men in a bathroom. These videos initially appeared on an invitation-only dark web forum for pedophiles. And one of the young boys who was victimized in the video was being abused on a changing table. Authorities were eventually able to track down the Galleria Mall in Houston as being the place where these sickening videos were recorded. Keep in mind there were 4 different videos depicting the abuse of these toddlers by this group of 7 men. And eventually, because of 2 silver bracelets that Arthur was wearing on his wrists, he was identified. As it turned out, Arthur wears these bracelets all the time, and the relatives of the 2 young victims identified Arthur through these bracelets. Apparently, Arthur worked with the mother of one of these children and worked next door to the mother of the other child. And sometimes when these 2 mothers were called into work on their days off, they would trust Arthur to keep care of their kids. The evidence in this case is overwhelming and disgusting. I'm going to read this to you. This is from the Daily Mail. One of the men even told the victim, the young child in the video, to shut the F up as he struggled. And in another video, an abuser called the boy, "You effing slut," and told him to cry like a little itch. So far, none of the other men in this case have been charged with anything or even identified, and I think that they need to find these guys as soon as physically possible and bring them to justice, because this is horrific and disgusting that these men are still out there walking amongst us. And now I'm going to look at the Galleria here in Houston in a completely different light. And I hope that Arthur suffers for the rest of his hopefully short life.
21-year-old Lily James was found brutally murdered in her school's gym bathroom, and the person responsible was one of her scorned male colleagues. Lily was a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School in Sydney, Australia. For the past 5 weeks before her death, Lily was dating 24-year-old Paul Fyson, who was a cricket and hockey coach at the same school. But just days before, Lily had actually broken up with Paul and just wanted to remain friendly with her male colleague. But on October 25th, Lily was reported missing after failing to return home. Just before midnight, police received a phone call from Paul stating that there was a body at the school that should be investigated, and when police arrived, they walked into a gruesome scene. There in the school's gym bathroom was a woman who had been a clear victim of homicide. Police described the woman as having serious head injuries from a hammer that left her to be unrecognizable, so much so that it took them until the next morning to officially identify her as Lily. Authorities began combing through surveillance footage and found that Lily was last seen alive on CCTV footage entering the gym bathroom around 7 p.m. the night she was found. Paul was seen following her close behind and entering the bathroom as well. It's assumed that a fight broke out between the two of them, and that an hour later, Paul was seen leaving the bathroom without Lily. Sometime after the attack, Paul texted Lily's dad from her phone asking to be picked up from the school. He then went to Diamond Bay Reserve, which was his last known location, and dumped a backpack containing some personal belongings and a hammer, which was later determined to be the murder weapon. Around 2 hours later, this is when Paul called 911 to report the body at the school. After this, Paul disappeared, and this is when police publicly identified him as the prime suspect in Lily's death. His body would be found 2 days later on the rocks beneath Diamond Bay Reserve by a group of tradesmen. He was identified via fingerprints, and it was determined that he ended his own life after murdering Lily. There were no reported domestic violence issues between the two of them in the past, but that doesn't really mean anything because, as we all know, we never truly know what happens behind closed doors. Lily was described as the nicest and kindest person who was vibrant, outgoing, and very much loved by her family and friends. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio created for Lily's family to take the time necessary to grieve this incredible loss. I'd like to end this video on a note from Lily's grandma. She said, quote, "Some people come into this world, I think they are so special, and they don't stay long. I think that was my granddaughter," end quote.
Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminated in acts of cannibalism.
On June 11th, 2005, Todd Geib seemingly vanished from an all-night keg party. But 22 days later, his body was found standing upright in a private lake that had already been previously searched. At around 9:30 that night, Todd and his friends left a restaurant to go to an all-night keg party that was being held in an apple orchard in Casnovia, Michigan. As the night went on, things started to get really rowdy, so Todd decided to leave the party at 12:45 a.m. and walk back to his apartment, which was only about 1.5 miles away. Doing so, he called a friend to tell them that he was on his way back home. Over the next 10 minutes, Todd made a series of bizarre phone calls. At one point, he called a friend and said, quote, "I'm in a field," end quote, before the call ended. The friend called back and Todd picked up, but all they could hear was what sounded like heavy breathing, and then the call cut out. No other calls went through after this, and his phone wasn't used again. This was the last time anyone heard from Todd. He was soon reported missing, and an extensive search was launched involving more than 1,500 volunteers and police officers. Authorities even searched by air, combing through the orchard and everything around it, even the stretch of road he would have taken to get home. Authorities brought in bloodhounds, which tracked Todd's scent up until the start of the road he would have taken to get home, but that's where it ends. It seemed as if Todd vanished into thin air. But 22 days later, his body was found in a private lake just 2 miles from his home, right in the middle of an area that had already been searched. But the odd thing was the way Todd's body was found. His body was found standing upright in the water with his head and shoulders above the surface. Nothing was weighing him down, and he had no external injuries. His remains only had little decomposition. His clothing appeared to be completely clean of debris, sand, and that slimy green substance that lays on the surface of bodies of water. He also didn't have any insects in or on his body, which is unusual if somebody was actually in the water for 21 days. A group of former NYPD detectives named Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and Michael Donovan, and Todd's mom had an independent investigation conducted. And from that, they learned that while Todd had been missing for 3 weeks, he had actually only been dead for 2 to 5 days before being found. The autopsy report also showed no water in Todd's lungs at all. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believed Todd was abducted, held on land for a period of time, murdered, and then placed in the water after death shortly before being found. Adding to this, on top of alcohol being found in his system, he also had traces of antidepressants, but he was never prescribed those. The pharmacist working on the case stated that those pills would normally never be given together because if they were, it would likely cause confusion and hallucinations. They agreed that both the pills and alcohol found in his system would have left him completely incapacitated and unable to get to the lake by himself. Despite all of this evidence, the Michigan State Police ultimately ruled Todd's cause of death as undetermined drowning. They believe Todd left the party intoxicated and just accidentally drowned in the lake. But Todd's mom and Kevin, Anthony, and Michael do not believe this. I'm sorry I have to do a part 2, but that'll be posted in the comments right now.
This is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is Hisashi Ouchi, and he became the most radioactive man in history after a lab accident. On September 30th, 1999, the 34-year-old Hisashi and 2 other co-workers were working at the Takamura nuclear plant in Takamura, Japan, and they were put on an extremely tight deadline by their superiors. The plant converted uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for the purposes of nuclear energy. This usually involved a carefully timed multi-step process, but Hisashi and his co-workers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadlines. But sadly, this turned into a horrific explosion of uranium solution that turned into a nightmare for Hisashi. The plant underwent emergency evacuation, and the 3 men were immediately rushed to help. They all had been directly exposed to harmful radiation, but to different degrees. The sole survivor of the group was exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation. The second one was exposed to 10 sieverts of radiation. and Hisachi was exposed to a whopping 17 sieverts of radiation, which was way more than any other human in history. And by the time Hisachi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood, but his agony had just begun. 3 days after the accident, Hisachi was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. Hisachi's lack of white blood cells and his non-existent immune response prompted experts to try a number of procedures to save him. Doctors tried countless skin grafts and blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants. But sadly, none of these seemed to work. Hisachi soon cried out, "I can't take it anymore, I'm not a guinea pig," just after 1 week of treatment. But although Hisachi begged for his death, his family insisted that doctors kept him alive to keep trying experimental treatments. Hisachi's skin began to melt off of his body, and even after this, his relatives ordered his doctors to do whatever it took to keep him alive. All in all, Hisachi was kept alive against his will for a disturbing 83 days. And at one point, he suffered 3 heart attacks in just 1 hour. And following the guidelines from his family, the doctors resurrected him again and again and again. Every time he died, he came back and suffered extreme brain damage. And on December 21st, 1999, Hisachi finally died of his last heart attack after multi-organ failure, and it was only then that his torture stopped. You really can't fathom the amount of pain this man was in until you see the photo of him. He doesn't even look human and kinda looks like an insect. The radiation poisoning is that bad. I don't recommend looking the photo up, but if you do, while you're looking at it, keep in mind he was kept alive for 83 days in this state. Could you honestly imagine what was going through his head and what his body was feeling? This is something straight out of a nightmare, and may Hisachi Ouchi rest in peace. This girl got cut into 2,000 pieces, and this is a massive trigger warning. On January 19th, 1996, the mutilated remains of Diao Aquing, who disappeared 9 days prior, were found across multiple locations in China. Her body had been dismembered into over 2,000 pieces. The case remains unsolved, and it's one of the most notorious crimes in Chinese history. On January 10th, 1996 in the evening, Diao and her college roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electric appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. The discovery of Diao's remains in the winter of January 19th was first reported by a sanitary worker. Initially, he thought it was pork, so he brought it home for food. And while preparing the meat for himself, 3 human fingers were found in it. The worker then reported the discovery to the police, and they confirmed they were human fingers. Human remains in plastic-wrapped packages were eventually discovered across 8 locations around the university, including at a stadium, entrance gate, hospital, and along roadsides. The police later confirmed that the scattered remains were of Diao's and informed her father to visit Beijing. Between January 20th and 30th, Diao's head and clothes were found. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Crucial organs including the heart, liver, and spleen were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives of Diao were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel, which in my opinion is a nice way to put it. The officer also added that the pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision, only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or surgeon. Teachers and students then became the subject of investigation. 2 suspect profiles were brought up, including a single physical fit middle-aged male. However, the university department could not find any individuals that matched the characteristics of the profile. A major investigation was launched in the university and the areas around, but no major clues of the crime were found, and the case failed to make any progress. In 2016, Nanjing police told the family of Diao that the case is still under investigation. Okay, so let's talk about this case for a second. If the killer was never found and he had the skill to dissect somebody into 2,000 pieces and never get caught with it, don't you think he might be a serial killer? And if he was, how many more people do you think he murdered after Diao? The dedication and skill, and honestly the obsession to cut somebody into 2,000 pieces and not get caught with it is crazy. This person could be walking around the streets of China today doing the same things to other people that he did to Diao. The thought of that is absolutely disturbing, and may Diao rest in peace.
Whomever coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I'm not trained in torture methods, which is what I'm gonna have to make do. I got my drill here. The reason why it's got this fucking padding on it is just to try to silence it a bit because I'm in an apartment. I got gags.
That video was recorded on January 7th, 2005 by 29-year-old Ricky Rodriguez. And the next day, he would go on to kill a woman before taking his own life. Now, the story of Ricky Rodriguez is an incredibly sad and complex one. But his adoptive parents were members and leaders of a cult in America known as the Family. Basically, this cult believed that Ricky was a prophet that was going to bring about the end times. And this honestly was one of the worst cults in American history. You see, various members of the Family, the cult, essayed Ricky from a very young age. There were nannies that assaulted him, parents that assaulted him, and dozens of members of the cult who were even photographed assaulting him. And members of this cult actually wrote down a record of all of these assaults, describing them in graphic detail, and provided photographic evidence in a little book that they titled The Story of Davidito. This book, written by members of the cult, was a 762-page document